Welcome to the hardest video I've ever had to make during my stay on YouTube. This is not an apology video, yet. It might turn into that, because today we're looking at the blur of mediocrity in Soulsborne Areas. Last time we looked at the awful and bad tiers, so it's at least going to be a step up from that. So, let's get crackin', shall we? For an uber-dark Dark Souls area, Chasm of the Abyss isn't too gimmicky or annoying. It has some mesmerizing visuals with the endless humanities floating around, as well as everyone's favorite puppy, Sif, who I'm sure nothing bad will ever happen to in the future. And of course, it leads up to a fantastic boss, so what's not to like? Oh wait, it's in the mediocre tier, so there's probably some things to not like. I think this guy's comment pretty much sums up my thoughts. Chasm of the Abyss is kind of overrated since it's just a dark cave with a load of reused enemies from the last area and spammed humanity enemies that are boring to fight. It's tiny and there's nothing special or interesting about it apart from Mensis. The only reason people even like it is because of the Sif secret and the humanity farm. I know many of you despise Nightmare Frontier and expected it to appear in the first part of the series. It's often regarded as a trash tier area by the community, but I am not the community. I am a 100% based facts machine, and I don't think I can confidently say that Nightmare Frontier deserves crucifixion. It is a poisonous, swampy area, and that's usually all you need to say to get everyone to hate it. But let's not forget that a good portion of the level is on solid ground with decent enough enemies. And I like how it looks. It's a nice departure from the sameness of Yharnam. It's bright and rocky and yet alien and foreboding. I like the little cost slugs, they're just full-blown aliens. And I'm not alone on liking them, so shut up. But admittedly, all the swamp stuff is pretty miserable, especially when you've got winter lanterns with their frenzy on top of the poison. Did we really need two status effects at the same time? When I think of the word mediocre, Road of Sacrifices is one of the first things to come to mind. But when I think of the word anal cyst, I think of the beginning of this area. Do I really need to explain why this part sucks? Besides the fact that it's a linear piece of shit with annoying loud spammy enemies. I don't? Good, let's move on then, to the swamp. Even though it doesn't have any poison, it feels like another poison swamp in its layout. It's mostly just dull, but not particularly annoying. It's a little more colorful than your average Dark Souls 3 area, but that's not saying much. At least it has some variety with the ruin sections to give some break from the tedium of the swamp. But really this place just feels like a subsection of an open world area in Elden Ring, and not a good one. The only thing I really like are the crucified guys, they actually kinda scare me. And the early Black Knight is also a fun challenge. The Lord's Path is an area entirely centered around the green and red light simulator that is, dragons. You've got one big ass bridge to cross and a dragon harassing you from beginning to end. And like the sadistic bastards they are, they scattered loot all around its flight paths. But what I like enough about the Lord's Path to elevate it above the bad tier areas is how you have two levels, one at the top and one inside the bridge. You can pick your poison, deal with the dragon or with the dogs inside, or alternate between the two, and that's pretty nice, even if neither option is particularly enjoyable. It has pretty nice views on the top though. Catacombs of Carthus is the most bland-looking area in the entirety of Dark Souls 3. The entire game is restricted to two colors, grey and brown, and this is the epitome of that. It's just samey corridors and rooms full of skeletons and jaws. None of it is really bad, but it's not memorable or anything. But I will say, it does have some occasional good enemies. I like the Carthus swordsman who can roll around, jump and throw knives. Besides that, I'm really having trouble finding anything to say. This is exactly why this video is so difficult to make. You could put this area 5 spots higher or lower, and I wouldn't really argue. I'm just completely indifferent. I'm sorry. Now this really is turning into an apology video. Today's spiciest take, I imagine, is putting frozen Eleum Loyce as low as I have. I've seen many community rankings where this area has ranked as number 1 in all of Dark Souls 2, and I've seen that sentiment shared around my comments. So, I really hate to let you all down, but I fucking hate this zone. I always dread the moment in my playthrough when I step into this frozen nightmare. But I can't say it's a bad or awful tier area because level design is pretty on point here, and I like some of the ideas they had. When you first enter Eleum Loyce, it's covered in a blizzard and multiple paths and chests are blocked off by ice. Once you've defeated Abba and progressed, all the ice will melt, so now you'll have to remember where you saw all those frozen objects and paths. So far so good. But where this area loses me is in the forest repeat exploration. If you want to beat the final boss, you'll need to find friendly knights hidden behind these previously blocked paths. The bonfires are spread out so far from one another, every time you backtrack you have to walk what feels like miles. And because of the enemy ganks and tight doorways, you often have to clear out everything again. And with the ice thawing, you now have even more enemies waking up, and very few of the enemy encounters are actually fun. These are reskinned enemies from the previous 2 DLCs, and some of the new ones, such as ice hedgehogs, are the worst enemies ever made! And I often can't remember where anything is because everything looks the same. And if you hate me for saying this, guess what, motherfuckers? Way back then, Valtividia, the lore saint, shared my exact sentiment.
But the problem I have with that is that my surroundings were so damn boring that I barely remembered them. Snowy outdoor area, empty brick indoor area, snowy outdoor area with a fountain, brick indoor area with a torch, you get the gist.
Many do love this area's aesthetics, but I find it very hit and miss. Sometimes from afar the cityscape looks neat, but all the indoors are extremely bland and lacking in detail. So this area, it's fine at first, but it really overstays its welcome. Shunning-Grounds is a tough area for me to rank. I think level design wise it's pretty good. It's a massive sewer system that's the closest to a labyrinth the series has gotten, even more so than the depths from Dark Souls. I also appreciate that the entire area revolves around a single bonfire, especially since it's directly below Lanedale and shares the same map. But do I enjoy getting lost here? Not really. Not at all, really. I like the Omen, they're a well-designed tough enemy, but they're way too tanky to be used so frequently and back to back. There's this one tiny room where you end up fighting 3 of them, one after another, or at the same time as I've been unlucky enough to discover. And look at this guy going down the ladder, oh my god, that ass! Other than that, there's rats, slugs, and thralls from Dark Souls 3. I'll be talking more about how much I hate thralls when we're deep digging Dark Souls 3 areas, but safe to say, I wasn't happy to see them return. And for replays, there isn't much reason to come back here. All it leads to is a preview of Morg and a massive, horrible platforming hellhole. Listen, I promise, not every area in this video is going to be Dark Souls 2, partly because we already did half of them in the last video. But Tseldora is trying its hardest to be an annoying area, but it doesn't always succeed, especially if you use a torch which keeps the massive hordes of spiders at bay. And there's a good amount of changing of scenery. It starts out with a little camp, then a mining operation, then a spider-infested village, and at the end a giant spider cave. None of the little areas here are very nice to look at, but they have decent enough exploration, especially around the village, which has spiders coming in from holes in the walls and there's Resident Evil monsters. But if you don't use a torch, it's fucking awful. I'm not sure how much I blame the game for not giving you any hints to use fire, since it's pretty common for games to have bugs be extremely weak to fire. But since I've sped Tseldora the bad and awful tier, I guess I don't blame it too much. Deeproot Depths is like a boring Dark Souls 3 area, except you're given a horse to ride around on, so it's far quicker to get it over with. It does have a pretty interesting aesthetic. It's like a combination of the beauty of Syovra River with the nastiness of Ainsel River, but it offers nothing that those 2 areas didn't. Only more ants. Way too many fucking ants. It's making me antsy. There is the harrowing Copse of Godwyn, but all that leads to is the horrendous Fia questline. The one thing I do like about Deeproot Depths is the use of roots as level progression, as well as the fire-spewing gargoyles on top of them. It makes you have to jump around from one route to another, and as brief as it is, it's quite fun. Hemwick is probably the most forgettable destination during your Bloodborne travels, even though it is a nice break from the big gothic city aesthetic. But if we are counting the forest preceding Hemwick as part of this area, good lord, I wish I had stayed in the city. If you enjoy being executed by firing squad, this is the place for you. The one thing that keeps Hemwick on the higher end of mediocre areas for me is the extra shenanigans that occur with higher insight. You'll have some of the creepier looking enemies spawning here and there, which is nice because the place is otherwise devoid of interesting encounters. There's loads of dogs and people tossing Molotov cocktails. Really, the most memorable encounter is the random docile crow body. Another bland, mediocre area on the list is Huntman's Copse. But it does actually look kinda neat from afar, especially with the greenish, yellowish sky, birds, ominous fortress in the distance behind a dark forest. But as soon as you're actually in the forest, it's just a dark grey mess. It loses all the atmosphere it had at first. But there are a few decent things to say about this place. I like that it branches out and isn't just a linear level. You could either go for the Undead Purgatory or fight the Skeleton Lords by the waterfall. Some of its enemies are also relatively fun, especially the guys guarding the Purgatory. They do suck if you wanna just run past them to get to the boss, but if you're patient, it's pretty satisfying to fuck them in the ass. The way I see it, now that we have Farum Azula, we don't need Archdragon Peak. Just delete it. Let's pretend it never happened. Have Nameless King appear somewhere else. I did always enjoy the Ancient Dragon Temple aesthetic, but this place is so bright it kinda burns my eyes to look at. And it burns my ass to play because the snakes are ramming their heads up my rectum like the tapeworms they are. This place is just exceptionally ganky and lacking in interesting layouts and scenarios. They kinda tried with the dragons, but one of them is Ancient Wyvern and the other is accompanied by rock lizards. But I can't deny how cool it was coming across this place the first time. It's such a departure from the rest of the game in pretty much every way. It's a very FromSoft thing to do to have a hidden area with its own exclusive set of enemies and assets, but in this case, it can stay hidden for all I care. So fittingly enough, Ashina Depths is the lowest point in Sekiro. Well, besides Abandoned Dungeon, but that can barely be counted as an area. Ashina Depths, on the other hand, is kind of massive. It starts out at the Snake Eyes encampment within a poison swamp, goes all the way through misty forests into Mibu village and ends at Corrupted Monk. I don't think the gameplay throughout is really bad, but to me Ashina Depths is basically all of Sekiro's downsides in a single area. If you've killed Guardian Ape, it has the Headless Ape Gang, which is an abysmal fight, on top of being a rehashed one. The forest has nothing but bandits from Hirata Estates, and for some reason they're even doing the same idle animations such as scouring the ground for loot or getting drunk. The fuck are you gonna do with loot? You're ghosts! And prior to Mibu Village, it has 3 mini-bosses. Another Snake Eyes, except this time in poison, a Headless Bastard, and a straight-up copy of Juzo. I like Juzo, but he's repeated way too often, and this one felt the most unnecessary. Oh, right, it also has Mist Noble mini-boss. Never mind, this is an amazing tier area. The Mibu village is definitely the one redeeming quality of Ashina Depths. It's got fishing hamlet-esque vibes, its own unique enemies, as pathetic as they are, and a wholly original tough mini-boss. But then it ends on Corrupted Monk, which is just an unfinished true monk. There's just a bit too much repetition in Sekiro, and that's highlighted the best in this entire section. It seems to me that Blighttown has had a bit of a redemption arc in the eyes of the community. I remember when it used to be the undisputed most hated area in the game, but it seems a lot of that was due to poor frame rates at the time. Now that people can actually play the game, it seems they've realized, since it's not awful, it must be amazing! Seriously, I see more people loving Blighttown than people that don't. But unfortunately, I can't quite say I'm part of the Blighttown renaissance myself. I think the upper sections are decent enough while everything at the bottom is garbage. It's just another wide open poison swamp. So it evens out at around mediocre for me. Even the good bits do have their drawbacks like toxic dot throwers and mosquitoes. The dot bastards don't respawn, but that usually doesn't matter for me because I'm not coming back that way anyway. Dealing with them that one time is annoying enough. They're generally very quiet and out of immediate reach and can apply toxic from a single hit. Instead of making them not respawn, how about don't make them spawn in the first place? That would be great. Dark Souls players, they're okay getting raped as long as the dick doesn't respawn in their ass the next day. It's a good world building location, I must admit, and I appreciate how it connects to Valley of the Drakes, the Depths, Great Hollow and Demon Ruins. So I'd say we are around the point of around 5 out of 10 areas where I'm kind of unsure if they're top of mediocre or bottom of decent. I think the nerve-wracking atmosphere of New Londo is enough to tip it over to decent, but the linear level design for its first half is enough to drop it back down to mediocre. But then the second half being revealed after draining the water, along with its intimidating dark wraiths, brings it back up to decent. But then the annoying masses of ghosts brings it back down. But then again, it's cool how they can move through walls and floors unlike any enemy in the series, so that could take it back up to decent. So you can see I'm rather conflicted on this one. On a bad day, I'd say it's a mediocre area. On a good day, I'd say it's decent. Another area riding along the edges of mediocrity and decency is Yahar Ghul. When I started making this video, I actually considered it for bad tier, so this is quite a step up from that. I just have bad memories of the plethora of reused Yanamites in massive ganks, as well as the trio of hunters in the midpoint of the zone. These three are the Bloodborne equivalent of the Dark Souls 2 Cave of the Dead gank squad. fuck 'em. But the more I think about it, the more I can forgive some of its annoyances. First of all, it looks pretty cool, especially with the pale blood sky and giant amygdala aliens hanging off the buildings. Plus, they can shoot lasers. But what really made me change my mind about putting Yahar'gul in the bad tier is your first potential visit to the place. One of my favorite moments on my first playthrough was getting abducted and ending up in a completely unfamiliar place, and hearing that creepy chanting in the background was really unsettling. And the chanting gets louder as you progress up and outside, makes you wonder if there's some kind of fucked up ritual going on. It's not a fun area gameplay-wise though, so again, on a bad day I'd say it's mediocre, on a good day I'd say it's decent. I guess I'm having a good day. Our first for sure decent tier area, No Man's Wharf, is a pretty neat structure. When it loads. Well, this is embarrassing. It's a little port town inside a massive coastal cave that has a ghost ship inside it. It starts out being extremely dark, but you might find it rewarding to light the place up. Not just to make it easier on the eyes, but to also weaken Dark Souls 2's creepiest enemies. These lanky Wendigo bat creatures. I still remember being genuinely uneasy when I first encountered them, and even with the use of fire, which they fear, they still tend to be unpredictable. And the fact that you finish the level by calling the ghost ship to dock before fighting the boss inside it is neat. The one rather big downside is how much enemies gets thrown at you at once in some parts. This is very ganky even for Dark Souls 2 standards. Shaded Woods as its own area is pretty mediocre, it definitely looks mediocre, but I appreciate its existence for the sake of world design. Majula already connects to a lot of different zones, and having one of those be Shaded Woods, which connects to Doors of Pharos, Aldia's Keep, Dranglake Castle, and sort of the third DLC, makes the first half of Dark Souls 2 actually kind of good. At least if you're into exploration and non-linear progression, which I am. And Shaded Woods has a lot of variety in itself. There's ballsack belly guys who always make me think of this one GIF I've seen, the path to Dranglake with busted animation falconers, ruins with cursed faces and lion men, as well as a blindingly foggy forest with near-invisible enemies. The last one on paper sounds like a horrible nightmare, but I'd say it's the least offensive vision gimmick area. It's at the very least brief. So yeah, I'm kinda surprised about this placement even myself, but I do kinda like Shaded Woods now. Catacombs is one of the most divisive areas in the series from what I've seen. Lots of people either love it for its vertical layout and oppressive atmosphere, or hate it for its respawning enemies, and, well, enemies in general, particularly the bone wheel skeletons at the end. As the filthy centrist that I am, I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't really like the panicky rush mode you have to be on for most of this level when you're trying to bum rush to the necromancers to stop the skeletons from respawning, but I do love the sprawling vertical layout and how you can create shortcuts by turning bridges around so you can drop down on them. And if you have a blessed weapon, you can bypass the entire respawning mechanic, which is good to know because that's definitely what I'll be doing from now on. I wish there was a bonfire before Pinwheel that wasn't hidden though. I know there's a bonfire right behind this wall, but I don't remember how to get there. I've found it once throughout all my playthroughs and never again. Not that you need one for Pinwheel, but for Tomb of the Giants. I don't enjoy going through this area a whole lot, but I can't deny the design is really good. One thing I failed to mention while talking about the Swamp of Sorrow in the last video was its renowned atmosphere. If anyone out there doesn't completely despise that area, that's the sole reason why. And I enjoy that aspect too, but even more so in Depraved Chasm because it is an absolute cancer to go through. Well, aside from the rats. I don't think I've ever in my life gotten past them without getting plagued. But I somewhat enjoy the exploration and disorienting layout. I quickly lose all sense of direction here, but I would say it's to the area's benefit. I know many think the Demon's Souls remake has ruined the feel of the original, but personally I think Valley of Defilement has benefited greatly from the update. Speaking of Demon's Souls upgrading the look of an area to its benefit, I think the same could be said about the Island's Edge, or Shrine of Storms as a whole. The added lightning, rain and fog has really added a lot to the visuals, but the gameplay remains the same and as such I can't convince myself to put it higher than decent. Not so much because of the skeletons, I'm one of the few people in the world who sorta likes them, as long as they're not in narrow tunnels or in groups, or accompanied by the flying manta rays. They're the real plight of this zone and they do nothing but make it less fun to play. Whenever they're around, my enjoyment tanks by about half, and they're there for about half of the level. Alright, well, now we get to talk shit about the thralls in their natural habitat in Dark Souls 3. They're very small in stature, they move and jump around in and out of your reach, they're fast and spammy, and they're always in packs. So what do I think about them? Well, I don't think I really like them. And they especially stand out in Undead Settlement because most of the other enemies are generic cannon fodder that will fall over if you so much as fart on them. Or they're dogs. But the occasional thick witch and pot smasher does remedy this issue a little bit. They're the only enjoyable part of this area gameplay-wise. But I do really like the layout of Undead Settlement. Right off the bat it branches out into different directions which will eventually reconnect to one another. In terms of different scenarios and visuals, it does have quite a bit of variety. It might feel like a knockoff of Hemwick, but it does improve upon its level design at least. Duke's Archives has a lot of potential to be a really great area. It's got an interesting layout, an atmosphere that's somewhere between ominous and magical, but gameplay has never been the highlight of my trips here. I like the stairway puzzles, but not the enemies as much. Mostly you fight hollows from the early game, except now they're covered in crystals and do more damage. Then there's a reappearance of the snakes from Sen's Fortress, and the ugliest looking forest in the game, followed by a gimmicky crystal cave, which I've decided to include as part of the archives. Otherwise you would have seen it make an appearance in the first video. The invisible platforms is an okay concept, I just hate running through it if I die at any point in the level, and some of the surfaces are very janky. So overall, low decent for me. I decided that out of all the castle areas in Elden Ring, such as Castle Morn and Shaded Castle, this one stands out the most. I'm not including the others, even though I think they're decent as well, but they share the same assets and everything, so I don't really have too much to say about them individually. Caria Manor, on the other hand, no pun intended, feels very different, and I can't quite place my finger on it. It starts out with an army of creepy crawling hands and... oh boy, they're quite a handful. Okay, I swear I didn't pick Caria Manor just to make hand puns. I do think it's a pretty neat level with surprising variety and fun exploration. It's at first a tennis trip through a densely packed garden full of monsters, which is most likely your first time seeing these enemies. Then an upper section with ghosty boys, some gnarly wolves, mages and a troll. You get the picture. It doesn't stick to a single gimmick or set of enemies like the other castles do, and instead keeps surprising you. I'm once again going to have to be an asshole and put a beloved, beautiful looking area lower than many may have expected. If it wasn't for its visuals, let's be honest here, it would be kind of a trash tier area. Its only enemies are reused dragons and suicide bombers that can destroy your equipment, which is the worst possible mechanic you could ever come up with. It's just annoying, and they know it. They revel in it. They want to force you to go all the way back to Majula to fix your shit, and they're laughing at you. And navigating this place can be a little tricky because it's just rocks connected by a billion rope bridges. But you guys are right, the visuals do count for a lot. This is one of the final areas of the game, and finally they let you have a bit of a breather. You're just taking in the scenery, stopping to smell the roses, only sometimes you smell gas instead of roses, but mostly roses. There's lots of moments of just quiet, no enemies, just walking around, and while in other areas that would be boring, here it's appreciated. Oh, and Dragon Shrine is included, which is very brief, very okay. It has a harder version of the Heights Tower of Flame enemies, and that's cool. Other than that, it's no wonder I forgot to mention it until now. Today's final area is once again from Bloodborne, but quite a bit less disappointing than last video's Bergenworth. Nightmare of Mensis has a pretty divisive reputation. It's notorious for its frenzy mechanic and terrible lead up with tons of enemies on top of a constant threat of frenzy. But I think as soon as you get inside, it's pretty decent. It does live up to its name and feels more like a fever dream than a real location. There's a fuck-off spider and its brethren welcoming you into the nightmare, passive little people who you'll probably assume are dangerous, then feel guilty for killing them when they don't fight back, and then wish you had killed all of them when they do attack when you approach their big mommy. There's eyeballs on the walls, dogs with crow heads, crows with dog heads, Mikolash howling, eye-infested pigs, and a giant brain full of eyes and tentacles at the heart of the citadel, which you can drop down and then approach in this complete darkness. I'm making this place sound awesome, but it's more conceptually cool than actually engaging and fun to play. Maybe I just have bad memories from all the blood gem farming, but I do also have good memories from all the PvP I used to do here. So it's a perfectly decent area, but the rest of the decent tier, as well as the good and great tiers, will be left for the next video. I'm just glad we got past the mediocrity. I'd rather talk about what I absolutely love or hate, instead of what I'm indifferent about. So, see you next time, I hope